4 armed robbers stormed a bank in Argentina, taking hostages in the process. The police quickly surrounded the building and hours of tense negotiations followed. Eventually, the robbers announced they were willing to surrender, but on one condition: the police had to bring them pizza. The pizza arrived, but then, unexpectedly, the robbers cut off all communication with the police. Sensing something was wrong, the authorities decided to storm the bank. However, when they entered, they found no one inside except the hostages. Confused, the police searched the bank thoroughly. They discovered the vault had been emptied, yet there was no sign of the robbers or how they had escaped. There were no holes in the ground, no hidden exits, nothing. Suspicion immediately fell on the hostages. Could the robbers have disguised themselves and blended in with them? Or had they managed to pull off an escape so ingenious that no one could figure out how? This is the mystery we'll unravel in today's story. In 2006, Argentina witnessed the execution of its most sophisticated and daring bank heist. It was a brilliantly planned operation, carried out by a group of 4 masterminds. Each member of the team had a distinct role. Fernando Araujo, the leader and mastermind, orchestrated the entire plan. Sebastián Viejo, the engineer, was the brains behind the technical aspects. Beto de la Torre, nicknamed the financier, provided the funding for the operation. El Silencio Han, dubbed the Violent One, was the muscle of the group. 2 additional accomplices, known only by their aliases, the Doctor and Yahao, the Kid El, provided external support, though their true identities remain a mystery to this day. Our story begins with Fernando, the mastermind. One day, he walked into a psychiatrist's office and made a shocking confession: "I want to rob a bank." The psychiatrist, assuming Fernando was under the influence of marijuana, a substance he frequently used, asked, "Why would you want to do that? Is it about the money?" Fernando's reply was unexpected. "No, I don't need money. You know me, I'm an artist. I love art, and I feel like I could create a masterpiece in the world of bank heists." Curious but skeptical, the psychiatrist asked, "And how do you plan to pull this off?" Fernando shrugged. "I don't know yet, but the idea has consumed me. I think about it before I sleep, when I wake up, and every moment in between. I want to rob a bank." The psychiatrist dismissed it as the ramblings of a man high on marijuana, but Fernando was dead serious. He began scouting potential targets across the bustling streets of Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. Eventually, he set his sights on Banco Río, a well-known bank located in an affluent neighborhood. It was the kind of place where the wealthy stored their money, valuables, and treasures. Fernando started brainstorming ways to execute the heist. His first idea was the classic approach: storm the bank during business hours, armed, and grab whatever cash was available at the tellers before the police arrived. However, he quickly realized the flaws in this method. It was risky, with a high likelihood of getting caught, and the payout would be minimal since they wouldn't have time to access the vault. Fernando knew he needed a better plan, one that would not only succeed, but also leave a mark as a work of criminal genius. And so the wheels of the most brilliant bank robbery in Argentina's history were set in motion. The second option was to break into the bank while it was closed. This method usually involved digging a tunnel underground to reach the vault. However, this approach had its challenges too. Modern banks were equipped with heat sensors and advanced alarms that could easily detect unauthorized access to the vault, even when the bank was shut. Both options were risky, but Fernando knew that if he was going to take such a gamble, it had to be for the biggest prize possible. That meant committing to the second method, tunneling into the vault while the bank was closed. Fernando began brainstorming how to dig the tunnel. Initially, he considered renting a ground-floor apartment or warehouse near the bank to dig from there. But as he scouted the area, he stumbled upon an unexpected discovery that would save him a lot of trouble. One day, during one of his reconnaissance trips, Fernando noticed the sewer grates lining the street in front of the bank. Every 10 meters or so, there was a manhole, indicating that an underground sewer system ran directly beneath the street. Intrigued, he realized that this sewer system might pass right under the bank. He followed the manholes until he reached the sewer's main access point, just 150 meters from the bank. Excited, Fernando climbed into the sewer to explore. At first, the tunnel was rectangular, but after walking about 100 meters, he reached a massive circular tunnel with a diameter of about 6 meters. This enormous underground passage stretched beneath the city and passed directly in front of the bank. With this ready-made tunnel in place, Fernando's plan suddenly seemed far more feasible. However, he knew he couldn't pull off such an ambitious operation alone. He needed someone skilled and trustworthy to help him. The first person that came to mind was one of his friends, Sebastian Bustamante, who would later earn the nickname the Engineer. Sebastian was an expert in electronics and mechanical systems, making him the perfect partner for such a heist. Fernando approached Sebastian and pitched the idea. At first, Sebastian was shocked. He had always known Fernando as an artist and a marijuana enthusiast, not someone with a criminal past or experience in theft. The idea of Fernando planning a bank heist seemed completely out of character. But as Fernando began explaining his vision in detail, including the discovery of the sewer tunnel and how they could use it to reach the vault, Sebastian started to see the potential in the plan. It wasn't just a heist, it was a masterpiece in the making. Sebastian found himself deeply conflicted. He had never stolen anything in his life, nor had he ever imagined stepping into the world of crime. But his family's tragic history with banks weighed heavily on his mind. His father and grandfather had suffered greatly during the collapse of Argentina's banking system years earlier. They lost most of their savings, and no one ever compensated them for their losses. To Sebastian, this wasn't just a crime, it was justice. The banks were the villains in his eyes, and taking from them didn't seem unethical at all. After much thought, the engineer finally gave Fernando his answer. He was in. With Sebastian on board, the two began planning in earnest. They returned to the bank and the sewer tunnel beneath it to conduct precise calculations. Fernando brought measuring tapes and began lowering them into the manholes. These tapes would help them determine their exact location inside the sewer and measure the distance between the tunnel and the surface. Next, they entered the bank. Posing as customers, they discreetly took photos and notes. They even managed to visit the vault, located in the basement, under the pretense of being new clients interested in renting safe deposit boxes. From this, they got a rough estimate of the vault's size and the number of safe deposit boxes. There were hundreds. Despite all their efforts, much of their information remained approximate. To refine their calculations, they needed precise building plans for the bank. These plans were likely stored in government archives or with the city's planning department. But the team faced another challenge: money. Sebastian needed funding to create the specialized tools required for the heist. Realizing they couldn't proceed without additional support, Fernando decided it was time to bring in another partner. He reached out to a mysterious figure known only as the Doctor. This man's true identity was never revealed, but he acted more as a coordinator than a direct participant in the heist. The doctor promised Fernando that he could connect him with the right people to help. The first person he introduced was Beto de la Torre Betts, who would earn the nickname the Financier. Beto was a seasoned criminal with a history in the underworld. While he didn't have direct experience with heists, he was well versed in the world of weapons and had connections that could provide the resources the team needed. With Sebastian and Beto now on board, the team was growing stronger and the pieces of the plan were beginning to fall into place. The leader, Fernando, an artist at heart, and the enigmatic doctor set out together to meet Beto, the financier. When they finally sat down, Fernando laid out the plan in detail. Beto, intrigued by the audacity of the idea, was eager to join. However, there was one problem: funding. Beto admitted, "I don't have cash on hand, but I do have a truck. I can sell it and use the money to fund the operation." With that commitment, Beto officially became the third core member of the team. The doctor, as mentioned earlier, remained more of a coordinator, not directly involved in the heist itself. Fernando, however, knew they needed a fourth member, someone strong and reliable for the physical labor required during the operation. Sebastian, the engineer, would already be occupied designing and building the tools. Beto, older and slower, wouldn't be enough on his own. The doctor suggested someone perfect for the job. Luis Sal, nicknamed the Silencer and dubbed the Enforcer. Luis was a seasoned criminal with a history in the underworld and a deep knowledge of cars and mechanics, honed during his time in and out of some of the toughest prisons. Luis was a hot-headed individual, always ready to resort to violence if needed. Yet beneath his fiery temper was a sharp mind and a knack for deception and acting, skills that would later prove invaluable. With Luis on board, the crew was complete, Fernando Uridia the mastermind and leader. Sebastian, the engineer and brains behind the tools. Beto, the financier. Luis, the enforcer. The four men began diving into the operation's finer details. Together, they descended into the sewer tunnel to inspect the location and verify the calculations Fernando and Sebastian had made earlier. The next step was crucial, obtaining the building plans for the bank. These blueprints would give them precise measurements and help them determine exactly where to dig from within the sewer. Luis confidently volunteered for the task. When the others asked how he planned to get the plans, he simply replied, "Don't worry about it, I'll get them." True to his word, a few days later, Luis returned with the blueprints in hand. To this day, no one knows how he got them, whether he bribed someone or broke into the city's planning department. What mattered was that he delivered. With the blueprints in front of them, the team could now calculate the precise location where they needed to dig. They mapped out the length of the tunnel, the angle at which it needed to slope, and every detail of the excavation. Sebastian drafted a detailed plan with all the measurements and diagrams needed to ensure their digging operation would succeed. The stage was now set, and the crew was ready to execute one of the most daring heists in Argentina's history. The team began gathering the necessary tools for the heist. They brought in a diesel-powered generator, large excavation equipment, and drills. Work began on the side of the sewer tunnel, with one person always stationed above ground on the street to keep watch and ensure the sound of the digging didn't escape the underground. The excavation process was expected to take several months at least. But with that challenge underway, they faced another problem: the bank's thermal sensors and alarm systems. These sensors would detect any heat signatures and trigger alarms. To solve this, they came up with a plan to disguise their heat signatures. They bought special suits made from the same material used by campers and mountain climbers to keep warm in extreme conditions. They also purchased a thermal camera to test if it could detect their body heat. However, this solution was far from perfect. There was still a chance the suits wouldn't work, especially since they would be moving around a lot inside the vault, carrying tools and equipment that might trigger the sensors. The risk was high, and Fernando, the leader, was growing frustrated with the uncertainty. He spent countless hours thinking of other ways to break into the vault. Then one day, a wild idea struck him. Up until that point, he had been focused on the plan to break into the bank when it was closed, using the tunnel to access the vault without being seen. But now, a new thought crossed his mind. What if they combined the two methods, the tunnel and a direct armed robbery? The idea was simple. Instead of using the tunnel to enter the vault, they would use it to escape. This way, the thermal sensors and alarms wouldn't matter. The police would be focused on the bank's exterior, unaware that the robbers would be escaping underground. When Fernando had this idea, he was overjoyed and immediately began researching online to see if anyone had ever pulled off a similar heist. To his surprise, he found no record of anyone attempting such a thing before. He believed he was the first person in the world to come up with this genius plan. In any case, as we said earlier, it was highly unlikely that the police would expect this. When Fernando shared his idea with the team, they were all stunned and excited. Now they needed to gather the weapons and equipment required for the heist. Beto, the financier, volunteered to take care of the weapons since he had experience in the criminal world. But there was something special about the weapons they would be using, something they wouldn't reveal until the end of the story. Keep that in mind as you continue reading, and you'll find out what it was. The whole process took about a year. During this time, they finished digging the tunnel and even built a small dam inside the sewer tunnel. The purpose of the dam was to raise the water level to a certain point. They planned to use small inflatable boats inside the tunnel, knowing that carrying the loot on foot with half their bodies submerged in water would slow them down significantly. The dam would allow the water to rise enough for the boats to move freely, making their escape much faster. As for the escape route, the initial idea was to flee toward the sewer's outflow, but then they realized that the police would likely head straight there as soon as they understood what had happened. They started considering the opposite direction toward the other side of the sewer. After studying it, they found this route to be much better because it had hundreds of exits. These exits were sewer openings spaced about every 10 meters along the tunnel. After careful planning, they chose a specific exit about 200 meters from the bank. They decided to park a van directly over this sewer opening with a hole cut in the van's floor. This hole would align perfectly with the sewer exit, allowing them to escape from the tunnel and into the van without anyone noticing. Indeed, Beto, the financier, brought a small van and parked it in his garage. The gang gathered there to modify the van and cut a hole in its floor. While they were working, Beto's wife, Elisa, suddenly walked in. The gang turned to Beto and asked, "What is your wife doing here?" He quickly reassured them, saying, No, it's fine, I trust her. Everything's okay, don't worry." This was the only time the gang met Elisa, the person known as the boy, whose true identity, like the doctor, remained unknown. He was responsible for driving the van and waiting for them after the operation was complete. With everything nearly ready, the only thing left to figure out was how to open the safety deposit boxes inside the vault quickly. There were hundreds of them, and opening them manually would take too long. So the engineer Sebastian created a hydraulic tool they called the canon. This device was designed to break open each safety deposit box in just 7 seconds, allowing them to speed up the process. After all the preparation and effort, everything was finally set. The sewer tunnel they would enter by boat, the tunnel they had dug leading to the bank, and the vault with the safety deposit boxes on the bank's lower floor were all in place. About 200 meters away was the sewer exit, directly under the van with the open floor, ready for their escape. The gang decided they would carry out the operation on January 13th, 2006. Sebastian, the engineer, was the only one to enter through the sewer tunnel. He positioned the small inflatable boats and tools near the tunnel's exit, including the hydraulic cannon. Sebastian then made his way through the tunnel until he reached the wall of the bank just behind the vault, where he waited for the signal from his teammates. Fernando, the leader, Beto the financier, and Louis the violent met in front of the bank. Once they confirmed everything was ready and everyone was in position, they stormed into the bank, weapons raised. They immediately took control, ordering the clients and staff inside to the ground, forcing them to lie face down. The bank guard, who was in the surveillance room, locked himself in and immediately called the police. It only took a few minutes for the nearby police patrols to arrive. At this point, Fernando began to execute a plan he had prepared beforehand, which he called the Coco Plan. The idea was to take one of the hostages and walk out the front door pretending to escape. However, he would quickly return to the bank once he saw the police surrounding the area. The goal was to make the police believe that the robbers had planned to escape before the authorities arrived, even setting up a fake getaway car in front of the bank. But once they saw the police closing in, they would return to the bank swiftly. The police assumed the robbers were trapped inside with no way out. Inside the bank, the robbers had full control of the situation, except for one problem, the guard in the surveillance room. They had to get him out of there, as he was in direct communication with the police. If he saw them leaving the bank, he would immediately alert the authorities, ruining their plan. Louis the Violent tried to negotiate with the guard, assuring him that nothing would happen if he opened the door. However, the guard remained firm, refusing to surrender. Louis, growing impatient, grabbed one of the bank employees, pressed his gun to her head, and threatened to kill her if the guard didn't open the door. The guard stayed resolute, but the employee, whom Louis knew personally, began to cry and begged him to let her go. She wanted to see her daughter again. The guard, moved by her tears and desperation, couldn't ignore her pleas. He finally relented, saying, "Fine, I'll open the door, but don't hurt anyone." He opened the door, placed his gun on the table, and surrendered himself to the robbers. Louis the Violent began searching the guard from top to bottom, taking his phone in the process. He then ordered the guard to walk out, raising his hands. The guard, confused and cautious, walked out the door and approached the police and special forces who had surrounded the area. The operation leader immediately asked him about the situation inside. The guard explained that he had seen 3 armed robbers holding about 30 hostages inside the bank. He also mentioned seeing one of the robbers masked, holding a phone and signaling to someone outside. The guard confirmed that they were using his phone to communicate with the police. Meanwhile, Fernando contacted the engineer Sebastian, who was waiting in the tunnel behind the bank's vault wall. Fernando instructed him to breach the wall. Sebastian began drilling from the outside, hearing a noise from the other side. It was Fernando moving a filing cabinet positioned exactly where Sebastian was drilling. Every moment, Sebastian feared he might be drilling in the wrong spot. Inside the vault, Sebastian and Fernando worked with hydraulic equipment, trying to open as many safe deposit boxes as possible within 2 hours. They estimated they could open around 400 boxes during this time. While they worked, Louis the Violent and Beto the Financier maintained control over the hostages, keeping the police at bay until the 2-hour mark passed. Louis, holding the phone, was skilled in deception and had a remarkable ability to manipulate situations. His acting talent was so convincing that he even became a well-known figure in the media, with reporters covering the event live. He was dubbed the Man in the Gray Suit. When the operation leader called him, he was taken aback by how calm and collected Louis sounded. "What's your demand?" the operation leader asked. Louis replied casually, "Honestly, we came to rob the bank and escape quickly, but you guys surrounded us faster than we expected. We don't want to hurt anyone, but now we're stuck. We don't know what to do." The operation leader watched Louis through his binoculars from the bank's window. He was sitting in a chair, relaxed, with one leg crossed over the other, acting as if he were unbothered by the situation. The leader was surprised at how composed Louis was, realizing that the man in front of him was no amateur. He had experience and a reputation. Louis cut off the thoughts and calmly told the operation leader, "Look, my friend, I just got out of Chica prison after serving 15 years. This isn't my first robbery. I know your procedures and this could lead to something bad for the hostages, but don't worry, we won't do anything rash. We just got your guard out. Don't get greedy, okay? We decide when to release the hostages, all right? Goodbye?" He hung up the phone, asserting control over the situation, making sure the operation leader thought twice before doing anything reckless. That was all they needed: time. One of the amusing things that happened was that Louis and Beto the financier discovered that one of the hostages was an elderly woman. It was her birthday, so they went to the small kitchen attached to the bank, brought her a small cake, and sang happy birthday to her. They made sure all the other hostages were on the floor, and in the end, they told her that her birthday gift would be her freedom. They let her go, sending her out the door with a smile. This story was mentioned in several sources, but its oddness made it stand out. Meanwhile, communication between Louis and the operation leader continued. Louis came up with new tactics to stall them. At one point, he even told them to contact his lawyer to negotiate the terms of their surrender. He gave them a phone number, claiming it was his lawyer's. When the police called the number, Louis answered, disguised his voice, and pretended to be the lawyer. He reassured them that they were negotiating for a peaceful surrender, buying more time. Lewis's ability to delay the police was remarkable. He single-handedly managed to keep them occupied for the full 2 hours they needed, preventing any interference with their plan. Unfortunately, when the 2 hours were up, Sebastian, the engineer, and Fernando, the leader, were still having trouble. The heat was rising, and it was making it difficult for them to work at the efficiency they had hoped for. But despite the challenges, the loot they managed to gather was massive, enough to set them up for life. In the end, they decided not to push their luck any further. They stuck to their plan and didn't let greed cloud their judgment. They had what they needed and weren't going to risk more than they already had. Fernando made the call to Luis, informing him that they were about to begin their escape plan from the bank. Luis, however, still had one last trick up his sleeve, a move he'd kept hidden for just such a moment. He dialed the operation leader and said, "Look, we're ready to surrender, but we know we're going to be held in custody without any proper food for a long time. Before we turn ourselves in, we want pizza. Make sure it's the real Italian kind." The leader, eager to comply, agreed, "All right, we'll get you the pizza." Luis gave them the name of a restaurant far from the bank, ensuring they'd waste as much time as possible. With that conversation over, Luis cut off all communication with the police. Meanwhile, upstairs, he and his daughter ordered the hostages to stay on the ground, faces down, not moving. They threatened to shoot anyone who dared to make a move. Down below, Fernando and Sebastian had gathered all the loot and placed it into bags. They passed the bags through the tunnel that Luis and his daughter had dug. As they quickly prepared to leave, they laid a small mat on the floor and placed their weapons on it. This move would only make sense at the end of the story. Once everything was set, they covered the hole in the wall with a filing cabinet, making sure it was hidden once more. They even placed something resembling a bomb near the hole to throw off anyone who might try to follow them. Then they descended into the small rubber boats waiting for them below. The bags were placed on one boat while they took the other. The boats were tied together with a rope, and they moved quickly through the sewer tunnel, heading toward the exit. When they reached the opening, they climbed up a ladder and saw the van waiting for them. They loaded the bags into the van through the floor opening, and the vehicle, surprisingly spacious, accommodated all their loot. Without being seen, they drove off to their safe house where they parked the van in the garage. The first thing they did was turn on the TV to check the news and see if the police were still on their trail. They were eager to find out if their plan had worked and whether they were still being followed. The funny part was that the police still hadn't raided the bank, and while the gang members were watching TV, they were celebrating, unaware of what was to come. Once the pizza Luis had ordered arrived, the operation leader tried reaching out to Luis several times, but every attempt failed. Realizing it was time to act, the leader gave the order for a full assault. Special Forces troops were ready for a confrontation. However, when they stormed the place, they found nothing but the hostages lying on the ground. The thieves had hidden the hole in the wall before leaving, and the police couldn't figure out where they had gone or how they had escaped. They assumed the robbers had somehow hidden among the hostages. After evacuating the hostages, the police detained them for questioning to confirm their identities. The image you see here is real. Eventually, after a thorough search, they discovered the hidden hole behind the filing cabinet, but there was still a problem. The bomb they found was just a fake, part of the thieves' plan to throw them off. Meanwhile, the gang was at the safe house enjoying their victory while watching the news on TV. They were celebrating their success. Soon after, they divided the loot among themselves, doing it casually without even feeling the weight of it. They didn't need to count it, they simply divided it by sight. The hole was immense, a small mountain of cash, gold, and jewels valued at around $19 million. This heist was soon classified as the largest bank robbery in Argentina's history. Once the loot was divided, the plan was clear: each person would go their separate way, and they would never see each other again. Everyone took their share, got in their cars, and drove off. They were all happy, but one person's joy was about to be short-lived. It was the financier's daughter, who, after dropping off her share at home, was greeted by her children and her wife Elisa, eagerly waiting for her. Elisa, as we mentioned before, was aware of the plan and had been anxiously waiting for the wealth that would change their lives forever. That night, he celebrated in a grand way with his wife and children. Time passed, and one day, after a night out with some friends, he returned home to find something unusual. One of the bags of loot that had been hidden in the safe was missing. When he opened the bag, he saw that a large bundle of cash was gone. He went to his wife, Elisa, and asked, "Tell me, did you take anything from the money?" Elisa coldly replied, "Yes, I took 5 or 6 small bags with me." These 5 small bags contained around $300,000. He was furious and said, "We've been trying to hide everything from the police and you took this money without telling me? You're going to ruin us." A heated argument broke out between them, with him demanding she return the money. Elisa refused, and the argument escalated. Eventually, he decided to hide the remaining loot in another place, never expecting that his wife would harbor such resentment. After he left the house, Elisa, consumed by jealousy and suspicion, went straight to the police and reported him. She probably believed he had taken the money to run off with a secret lover, thinking he was betraying her. The jealousy was so intense even though he didn't have another lover. He loved his family dearly and would never leave them. The details of what happened afterward are many, but the gist is that he was arrested. Despite his arrest, he refused to reveal the identities of his accomplices. However, with the help of his wife's testimony and other evidence, such as phone tracking, the authorities eventually identified the 4 members of the gang. Warrants were issued for their arrest, and each one went into hiding. But in the end, they were all caught. Fernando, the leader, had hidden himself in a tent in a remote location, but the National Guard managed to capture him. Louis, the violent one, even fled Argentina and went to Uruguay, his home country, but was caught there as well. Sebastian, the engineer, was the easiest to catch. He was at home when they arrested him. All 4 were apprehended and tried. The strange part is that most of the loot was never recovered. The thieves had hidden it in hard-to-reach places and refused to confess. In the end, they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 9 to 15 years, but none of them served their full sentences. They were all released early due to good behavior. Fernando, Sebastian, and each of the others served around 6 years, with Benita serving only 8, far shorter than the sentences they were originally given, which were already light. Now the question arises, how could a violent robbery of this scale result in such a lenient punishment? How could the sentences be so weak? The main reason was the weapons they used. Remember when I told you that their weapons were special? Well, they were actually fake. Yes, you heard that right. They entered the bank, executed a huge operation, took hostages and complicated things for the police and special forces, all using fake weapons. The reason they left their weapons on the mattress so clearly was because they weren't real. Can you imagine? They pulled off such a massive heist, took hostages and caused chaos. But the weapons they used weren't even real. This made all the difference in their sentencing. A robbery with real weapons comes with a much harsher sentence than one with fake weapons. And that's why their sentences were so light and why they were released early. But here's the strange part. As we mentioned, most of the loot was never recovered. Could there have been some secret deal made with the authorities to return a large portion of the money in exchange for early release? It seems odd that they were released without any sort of deal. The only possibility that comes to mind is bribery. But of course, these are just assumptions. Only God knows what happened behind the scenes. The bank's customers were compensated by the bank and insurance companies. There was a dramatic film made about the case, as well as a documentary. In the documentary, all 4 of them are seen proudly talking about their heist, and they seem to be living their lives comfortably. To this day, I'm not sure what happened to the money exactly. But that's the end of our story. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. You can also check out these amazing videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.